Welcome to the Landbridge podcast. I'm Lucinda Horrocks. In this episode, join me for a conversation about the palaeoecology of the Bassian Plain with Simon Haberle, Professor of Natural History and Palaeoecology at the Australian National University. This conversation took place in Canberra in 2023. You can watch parts of this interview in the Landbridge documentary film, and that's freely available to view from the Landbridge website at thelandbridge.au. Simon also co-wrote an essay for the Landbridge website with researcher Madeleine Bessel-Koprek about this topic. It's called Charcoal and Pollen from Old Lakes, and it's also freely available to read at thelandbridge.au. The hyperlinks to both the documentary film and that charcoal and pollen essay I just mentioned are provided in the program notes. Now, over to Simon. Professor Simon Haberle.
That's me.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Would you start by introducing yourself and your background for our viewers?
Sure. As you say, my name's Simon Haberle, and at the moment I'm a director of a school here at the Australian National University, and it's a very quite an amazing school where people learn things about the culture, history and languages of Asia and the Pacific and Australia. So we're quite a diverse unit, and we're here doing lots of different work with not just other countries and other peoples across the region, but First Nations peoples as well here in Australia and throughout the Pacific. So there's a lot of focus on trying to understand our place in the world and how the world is changing and how we need to maybe adapt and understand the long and deep histories and legacies of the past to better live and work into the future.
Understanding the deep past is important for this project.
It is, yeah.
I wondered if you could help us paint a picture, first of all, of what is a land bridge? What do we mean when we say that there was once a land bridge where the Bass Strait is now?
Yeah, a land bridge it's an amazing concept and one that you kind of have to think about and know a little bit about Earth history. And of course, what we do know is that during really cold periods, the last glacial maximum, which in this part of the world was around 20,000 years ago, the sea levels and sea volume was much lower. So around 20,000 years ago, the coast was some 150 metres lower than it is today. And so that means lower sea level, and the coastline is much further out than where you might stand on today's ocean. Some cases it's many kilometres further out was where the coastline was 20,000 years ago. And in a place like the Bass Strait, where the depth of the ocean is only, on average, up to 50 to 90 metres below its current level, once you lower the sea level to say 150 metres below its current level, you have an exposed landmass. And so this is called a land bridge because it's like a bridge. People can actually see the land and walk across it. And there's animals and plants and all the biota and so on that are associated with the terrestrial world that we know today. So they're kind of exciting. They're submerged now, of course, but they're exciting landscapes that we know very little about. And so the work that I do is to try and reconstruct those landscapes and understand a little better about what grew, what lived, and how people interacted with those landscapes all those millennia ago.
And it's such a long time period. Like, we're talking, how many thousands of years are we talking when it was a bridge, when people might have been living and crossing on?
Well, over the many millennia, even millions of years, this land bridge would have been exposed and then covered up, exposed and covered up as the sea levels waxed and waned over many hundreds of thousands of years. The kind of period that we're particularly interested in at the moment is the last 100,000 years or so, and within the last 40,000 years, we know that people, traditional owners of Tasmania, Pakana Truana peoples would have actually walked across and occupied the lands of Lutruta or Tasmania, as we know it today. So it's a remarkable story of people coming across that landscape and living and working in a land bridge environment and on what is now the mainland of Tasmania as well. So that's kind of part of the work that we're doing, is to try and help tell that story and provide some of the scientific background that gives a lot of the detail about what that environment looked like in the past.
And what happened when so the ice age ended, the sea levels rose again? What happened then?
Yeah, so we have this period of quite long exposure of the land bridge, and we think it became walkable, as it were. You could actually cross that land bridge around about 45 to 40,000 years ago. That's when sea levels at such a level that people could actually make the crossing into Tasmania from the mainland of Australia, and that lasted right through the last glacial maximum up until about 6 to 5,000 years ago, when the current sea level reached its current status. So that's an awful long time for many tens of thousands of years. People were living and working and crossing that land bridge. It's an incredible landscape that would have been open plains as well as forests with the classic Australian animals, the wallabies, kangaroos, emus, and so on, we know existed in this environment. And this would have been a bridge and a throughway for people to move over that many tens of thousands of years. And as I say, it's not until you reach this high sea level period of the last 5,000 years or so that we see probably a reduction in the kind of land use in that area. And some islands are used in the Bass Strait in the last 2,000 years. Some areas would have been far less visited and difficult to visit in the last 5,000 years or so. So there's different land use that happened across the Bass Strait region. And again, this is the kind of story we're trying to piece together, what impacts and changes occurred when people are using these environments and when they're less used.
So how do you know? How do you research a place that's now underwater and people that are long gone?
Yeah. Well, of course, the kind of work that I do is called palaeoecology, and that's a study of past ecologies, if you like to put it that way. And we reconstruct landscapes by going to repositories or archives in the landscape that hold information about the past, and these are fossilised material or material that's preserved within sediment that has accumulated over many thousands of years. So what's particularly interesting about the Bass Strait Islands, the pieces of landscape that are still exposed and have always been exposed and never covered by ocean, those islands such as Flinders Island or King Island and many of the other hundreds of islands that are there, some of those have lakes, lagoons and swamps on them, and these places actually accumulate sediment very slowly, but accumulate sediment continuously through time. And we've been able to find, with the help of the traditional owners of this land, the Truana peoples and Pakana peoples have been able to take us to these landscapes, and we've been taking cores from the wetlands, these lagoons and lakes and swamps, and taking those cores and looking inside the sediments, looking at the pollen, the charcoal, a whole range of other microscopic remains that can help us reconstruct what was growing in that environment, thousands of years ago. And we use radiocarbon dating to provide a chronology or a time frame in which these sediments were laid down, and the fossil material that's preserved within them is laid down as well. So that provides a really wonderful, almost continuous time frame and reconstruction of those environments over many, many thousands of years.
How far back would one of those lake core sediments go?
Yeah, no, that it's really remarkable the work we've been able to do in the islands, again with in collaboration and working with and for the community there. We've been able to find these amazing lakes that actually go back well beyond 60,000 years before present. So in a time where there was perhaps Aboriginal people hadn't occupied the region as yet, but what we see as soon as we come up to around 40,000 years ago, we see this remarkable imprint of people coming into that environment and using fire to manage and change the environment somewhat so that the food resources and so on become more abundant, and the environment becomes more of a mosaic of grasslands, heathlands and forests in which people are clearly living and working and obtaining food and resources from that environment. So it's a really remarkable story that dates around 40 to 41,000 years ago across that land bridge.
And that's the charcoal starts to kind of tick up at about that point, is that?
That's right. The indicators that we use, particularly the charcoal, which is a really good indicator of the fire events that have occurred in the past. So what we see at around 40 to 41,000 years ago is a remarkable increase in the amount of burning, particularly for the first 2,000 or 3,000 years, where people are clearly coming into that environment. There's no climate change explanation it's a period where climate is relatively stable in this part of Earth's history. So it's not really related to climate change. And the only obvious explanation is that it's people coming into these areas. And this is supported by archaeological evidence from mainland Tasmania. We know some of the earliest archaeological evidence for people in Tasmania is around 40,000 years ago. But what we do know now from our palaeoecological work is that people arrived into these environments and started burning, introducing what we now know as cultural burning practices to manage those environments, perhaps burning more frequently but with less intensity. And this is what we see in the palaeoecological record. And this lasts for, as I've said, many tens of thousands of years. So this is not a short history. It's a very deep and long history that is basically what creates the islands the way that that Bass Strait Island environment is there and the way it is because of this tens of thousands of years of management that has happened in that history.
So amazing.
Now, it is amazing. It's an incredible story, a story of remarkable resilience and understanding of that landscape, people coming into a landscape that's quite different to the mainland of Australia. It's as anybody who's visited Tasmania, there's a very different flora and fauna. People would have arrived and had to begin to understand how to live and work in that environment, and that clearly happened very quickly, and people were able to use the Bass Strait area itself, this vast plain, which would have had many resources in it, but also move into the mainland of Tasmania as well. And we see this in our records, this ongoing management through burning, using different burning regimes to maintain what was essentially a mosaic of open environments as well as the forested environments that we know that exist there today.
So when you say mosaic, and you've alluded to sort of the plants and animals that were on the plain, but what was it like, you know, to a viewer today? Where would we look to say, okay, this is what this plain was like?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because that's what we're trying to find the evidence for. And so we go to a certain site and find out what that reasonably local environment was like over many thousands of years. But we don't just go to one site to try and understand what the plain looks like. We're targeting a whole range of different lakes and swamps to try and build a story that covers the whole of the Bass Strait region. So we've been working in places like King Island, Three Hummock Island and Hunter Island, which are islands in the western Bass Strait area. And then in the Furneaux group as well, in the Flinders Island, Cape Barron or Trawana, and Clark Island or Luntalanana, which are Aboriginal land today. And we're working with the community there to build a picture of not just the local area, but also that whole Bass Strait Island landscape. And it's not uniform by any means across that region. It's climatically they're slightly different. It's wetter in the west and potentially slightly drier in the east, and so you have different vegetation communities existing in these areas as well. So those vegetation communities have slightly different histories and responses to fire as well. So it's a fascinating, complex landscape, but one that lends itself to this process of getting a paleoecological record out of that environment. And so as we go through this process of building up the picture of what the Bass Strait looked like through the many millennia, we'll be able to provide a very detailed picture of how those different ecosystems have changed, and the waxing and waning of grasslands and forests that were partly driven by climate change, but also maintained and utilised by people over that period. So yeah, this is a very exciting stage, and one that we're very fortunate to be able to work with community and provide that information to community living there today, who are using that information to better or help to manage and utilise that region into the future.
Yeah, it's lessons from the past. I'm just imagining how complex your task is, because you've got many thousands of years of change. You've got climates that are changing, and you've got people that are in there interacting with the environment changing.
Yeah.
So
no, that's right.
Unlocking all of that must be quite a big program.
It is. But and even more urgent, perhaps, is the notion that today we're in a phase of incredibly rapid climate change, and that's a time when people are clearly very concerned about what fire is going to do, what increased heat and storminess and these kind of and drought. How do we adapt and manage the landscape in a way that's going to be safe and productive and helpful for everybody concerned. But I think what we're learning and what has been known by Aboriginal people in Australia for many thousands of years is the traditional knowledge and knowledge of that past activities and current practices can be incredibly valuable, and in fact be positive in terms of helping to manage these landscapes. And one of the things we've found is that during these periods in the past where people have clearly used cultural burning practices, the amount of plant material that's burnt and able to be like the flammable component has been much reduced during cultural burning periods, when there's periods when people aren't present, perhaps the last 5,000 years in some of these islands. Then the build-up of biotic matter has been quite substantial and exposes these islands to much more intense burning. So So we're learning these lessons and showing from our research just what impact cultural burning can have on in creating a sort of positive and manageable environment, as it were, versus an environment that's has less of that activity, and then the consequences are you have a build-up of biomass that can be burnt and create really intense fires. So yeah, this has a historical sort of evidentiary package that we're putting together, but we see that in current practice as well, and people know this and are trying to adapt the fire regimes of today to better manage the kind of environment that is confronting us and the changes that are happening within our lifetime in many of these ecosystems.
And presumably people of the past were watching, they were seeing, I know that the climate change now is human induced, but even with the rising sea levels, and I imagine it would have been a global warming because it was an ice age, so it was warming, yeah. So at some point, people would have seen their landscape change very rapidly. That's within right. Perhaps a generation or so on that.
Indeed, yeah. And there's probably only 200 or 300 years when there's rapid sea level rise, islands being isolated or created in that process, and people having to adapt and move and change what they're doing. And clearly people were very resilient and were adaptable and just continued to utilise that environment, even though there's isolation of some of those islands. There's clearly long held connections, and in many cases you can actually see these islands from the mainland of Tasmania. So it's not as if there's a loss of contact or sort of spiritual significance, etc., of these places. So this is a continuous and ongoing connection with the islands, and one that's really important for communities in Tasmania now. And the reinstating cultural burning practice in many of these islands has been an incredibly important process of sort of reclaiming and beginning to manage and appropriately use these environments which Tasmanian Aboriginal people have utilised for at least 41,000 years. So really wonderful to see the kind of work that's going on and how people are really engaged with the cultural burning in particular, but living and working in these islands and what we can learn from it is really incredible.
What do you think is the most interesting thing about this? Like, because you're so embedded in all of this research. So, what sparked your interest, or what fascinates you about this particular point in time and the islands, the Bass Strait?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Tasmania. I'm a white settler origin in Tasmania, but I've always had a very close affinity to the land, and we grew up on a farm there in Tasmania, so always very close interest in the ecology and the people and the landscapes of that area. So I've always wondered and thought about why it is the landscape is like it we see today, and what are the long-term histories of the amazing ecosystems that we see. So I guess innately I've had a fascination with with the changes there and how we might understand those changes, and been fortunate enough to find myself in a discipline that really is about reconstructing past environments. So I began as a geographer with a geographic sort of background, as well as archaeology and a little bit of botany. So those things came together to enable me to actually work in this field of paleoecology and begin to tell the story of past landscapes. So Bass Strait in itself is such a dynamic landscape, and it's a landscape that many people don't know about. It's bit of a hidden kind of landscape, and so it's people fly over it, of course, to get to Tasmania, but very few people, I think, when they fly over or go over on the ferry, think about those islands and who's there and what's happening in that space. So yeah, it's an amazing story. It has a very deep and complex history. Clearly 41,000 years of Aboriginal occupation and people living and working in that space. But then, of course, the tragedy of and the terrible stories of colonisation and of course, people being taken from the mainland of Tasmania and incarcerated on Flinders Island, Wyberlina, an incredibly tragic story that needs to be told again and again so that people understand the deep and tragic history that exists in Tasmania and is still, in many cases, ignored or not told fully or pushed aside. So I think the Bass Strait, in many ways, has an incredible place in Australia's history, but also tells an incredibly tragic story, of course, that needs to be talked about and recognised, and truth needs to be told in that space.
Just going to have a glass of water, so feel free to. That's yes, powerful stuff. Very powerful.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Well, you've developed a way of working with First Nations communities on trying to understand this deep past. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that's important or how you approach it?
Yeah, look, I've been really privileged, I guess, to be able to work with communities, and it's always been by invitation and consultation as we go along in this process. And I mean, one of the reasons that we began working in the Bass Strait Islands was because of an invitation that came to us after quite a dramatic event that occurred on Lung, which is Clark Island, one of the Furneaux group, back in 2014. There was a massive fire, a very big fire event that occurred. It was a very dry period, and a fire escaped and actually burnt most of the island. And so this was a recognition that these big fire events could actually not just affect some of the smaller islands, but be a real risk on the bigger islands where people are living now. So the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre actually invited myself and some other researchers who are working in fire ecology, Professor David Bowman from the University of Tasmania, and myself went to Lung and started to look at the fire ecology, the impact of that big fire event, and to look at the deep time fire record and answer questions that the Tasmanian Aboriginal community and the centre were really interested in, as how often of these big fire events, if at all, have they occurred in the past, and is this unprecedented? So they were the questions that the community were wanting to find some answers about, and we were able to come in and use the science and the techniques that we had to work with them and provide these answers. And so that was the beginning of a longer term connection and relationship with community on the islands. And I've been very privileged and sort of honoured to be able to go back and return and continue to work with the Trawana, Cape Barren Island Ranger Group and Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre and so on Clark Island and other areas across the Bass Strait to build this story and build the understanding of, not just the deep past, but what are the potential risks into the future in terms of severe fires and the frequency of fires that might occur, and what impact that will have on the ecosystems that people have been managing and working with for, as I've said, more than 40,000 years. So it's really important, a real privilege, and it's always through invitation and consultation that we do this work, and that's not just with the rangers, but we also, when we go there, we're able to work with the school children. They have a junior ranger program, and we are able to go out with community leaders there and the school children as well, and show the kind of work we do and get people involved, in taking the course and looking at the microscopic fossils that we see. So yeah, it's really a wonderful privilege to be able to do that, and as long as community are interested in continuing to do that work and have questions that can be answered, then we will certainly be able to continue to do this work.
And what did you find? Is it okay to say that about the fire? Was it an unprecedented event, or had there been fires in the past?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been fires of some level in the past, and the frequency has changed through time, and that changes because of different climate periods, but also because clearly of people coming in and instituting their own fire regimes in that system. So what we found in the Clark Island record, that is, that massive burn that occurred appears to be unprecedented, and so the records we have would suggest that these really intense island-wide fires are incredibly rare, and we don't really see them replicated in the past records that we have, which extend for many thousands of years. So it is a suggestion that the time we're in at the moment, these last couple of decades, as climate change is becoming much more noticeable, by people, and is certainly evident in all the climate indicators, that we're in a phase of remarkable and rapid change, and so there will be periods when fire is incredibly significant, and particularly the southeast region of Australia. We know that massive fires can occur in 2019, 2020. Black summer is a canary in the coal mine almost of this kind of event, can and undoubtedly will be repeated into the future because of the changes that we see in the climate system.
Yeah. Another reason to explore past climate changes, to understand.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what we're trying to bring out of this work, is just how those changing fire frequencies will impact on different ecosystems. And some of these ecosystems contain plants today that are quite vulnerable or less adapted to fire. So clearly, if there's an increase in fire and fire frequency or intensity, some of these ecosystems may well be much reduced or even lost. And so this is what we're trying to understand, how resilient and adaptable these ecosystems will be into the future, and where we need to focus on trying to protect or manage in a certain way, and cultural burning can play a role clearly in this. It's maintained these ecosystems over 40,000 years. So this is, reinstating some of those cultural burning practices may well, and we believe will, help to maintain and maintain and conserve the remarkable array of ecosystems that are there today, even under rapid climate changing system.
Let's talk a little bit about how you do the research, because I know we're going to have a show and tell in the later, and also you've just been on a trip to Long Island. What does it actually mean to do this sort of scientific research? What do you have to do? You have to get on a boat or a plane? What sort of equipment do you have to bring with you? How many people come? Yeah. What goes on?
Yeah, no, it's a great it's a great exciting time to go on fieldwork, because you're going out onto country, and in this case, being invited by people onto their country. And so it's, we try to be take material that's has as least impact as possible on what are very precious ecosystems. So we don't go in with huge mechanical devices or big drill rigs or anything like that. That's we tend to focus on environments where the sediment is soft, so we have muds, lake muds, swampy peats, and so on. And we can actually extract those intact sediment cores using a manual sort of drilling rig. So it only takes one or two people to actually operate what is what we call it could be either a Livingston corer, it's called, or a D-section corer. These are manually driven and manually the strength of one or two people can be used to actually penetrate the sediment and extract these cores. So it has a minimum impact on that environment. This is another thing we try and maintain as we do our field work. So in this last field trip, we had three of us went out into the field, and we were accompanied by rangers from the Tauranga community, Cape Barren Island community, and we were able to go out into these wetlands, walk out into the middle of them in some cases. In some cases, we need rafts and boats because the water might be 2 or 3 metres deep. But we can get into the middle of that system, push down a tube or a half tube coring device that, with our strength, can go down actually many metres, depending on the sediment, and pull that material out and put it into a plastic casing, bring it back to the lab, and then we can actually do the detailed analysis on that sediment as we go through the different analytical processes. It's small numbers of people are required, which is good. It saves lots of trampling or disturbance of that environment, so we can move through and work in the environment with minimal impact, and leave that space as least impacted as possible after we've done our work. So again, it's kind of that process is very important to us in terms of how we treat the environments in which we're in and working with. So it's important for us to do that.
So it would leave a core. I guess it must be pretty muddy work, though.
It is, yeah. You don't come out of it clean, that's for sure. But it's you do get muddy, you do get wet, and so you've got to go dressed and appropriate for that. And of course, Bass Strait is quite windy as well, so you've got to be prepared for the strong winds, and so you clearly rug up for that. But we've been really fortunate, getting through that landscape. We've been able to be guided and taken to areas that Tauranga Rangers and Tasmanian Aboriginal Rangers are able to guide us and show us best ways to get to places and help us out on the way. So it's been a really great to be able to have that help to do the work, which is essential.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I was just thinking you were going on foot with the rangers showing you the way.
That's right. So there are some roads on some of the islands, so we can four-wheel drive to some areas, but then ultimately we have to walk into these wetlands. Many of them are not connected by any roads or so on. So in some cases we've had to take a boat around to a beach and offload on the beach and then walk into the wetland, that's using the boats of Tauranga Rangers and then guided in, that's enabled us to actually get into some of these really beautiful environments. They're very special wetlands, and in some cases those wetlands have been designated as Ramsar wetlands. This is an international recognition of the significance of the wetland as a sort of unique and biodiverse and important, significant place. And so a number of these sites that we've worked on are Ramsar wetlands as well. So again, this information will feed into what's known about those wetlands and how perhaps management of the wetlands can go forward, and providing a baseline information that we can provide of the status and what is living in those waters and so on in terms of biota. We can actually tell a lot about that through the work that we do as well. So it all feeds into the ongoing conservation and management of that system that is being managed by the Tasmanian Aboriginal community.
Because of course, you've got recent information going back all the way down to the deep past.
Yeah. But there's an awful lot of information about the current state of those wetlands as well. So we not only look at the deeper time past and how that wetland might have changed or evolved over many thousands of years, but clearly we're very interested in the current status of the wetland and what the future might hold. So by understanding the past, you can actually then better predict or better understand what's going to happen into the future. So that's, again, some of the value of the research that we do, helps to look at that future landscape as it was.
How do you know a wetland is very old?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We often don't know how deep we're going to get a core or how old those cores might be. What we've learnt, though, from the Bass Strait Islands in particular is that many of the wetlands are clearly originated during a glacial period, perhaps slightly drier period. And we know this because many of the lakes actually have what we call a lunette on the eastern margin of the lake. So these lunettes are small dune features that only really can form when the lake is periodically dry or very low water level and strong winds blow small pellets, sand and clay pellets into a low dune system, which we term a lunette. And so these lunettes build up over thousands of years as well, but leave a crescent-shaped margin to the lake, the current lake. And so if you look at lakes on air photos or Google Earth, you'll see some of these lakes have these very distinct lunette features on the eastern margin. And today they're covered in vegetation, of course. They're not actively building up, but they would have been building up during the glacial period when we know there was much better conditions for that build-up to occur. So just by looking at the morphology of the lake, you can actually begin to tell that, okay, this actually has quite a deep time origin, at least into the last glacial period. But we've been found with at least 3 of the lakes we've cored that these lakes go back, in fact, over 60,000 years, and maybe even further. We're yet to discover how old some of these lakes really are. So we're very keen to go back and do some more coring, and Tasmanian Aboriginal community, if they're interested in having that work done, and certainly I believe we believe this will be one of the projects we do into the future, and will be to go back and core much deeper and provide even a longer term history of some of these lakes like I say, one of the indicators that we can see now, because we've done the work and discovered what we have, that these lunette bounded lakes actually potentially are very, very old and so very special in many ways.
Wow. So what would you say is the top line story of this amazing sort of archipelago of islands that has this deep history of land and people? If you had to tell the overall story very briefly, what would you say?
Yeah, I think the islands are just incredible places that hold this deep history particularly of Tasmanian Aboriginal land management and living and working in that landscape. And in many cases, you could term these islands of fire. They are places where fire has played such a critical role in the past. And this fire through management or through climate change and so on has shaped the islands as we know them today, and they're incredibly biodiverse. They're incredibly rich in ecological history, but also history of people. And so it's an incredibly important story, I think, that needs to be told, and ones that on one side is quite tragic, particularly in the recent past, but on the other side holds an incredibly important history for humanity, really, how humans actually moved through the globe, occupied these far southern islands. People lived, worked, and adapted to incredible change, and in the end came out and still now are managing and working in these islands. So it's a really, hopefully, positive story as we move forward.
What's your favourite part of it?
I think I love being out on country, have the privilege of working with people on their country. So I think that's been just so wonderful to both interact with the landscape, this beautiful landscape, which has such incredible beauty in its structure, the granite landscape, the boulders, the vegetation, the beautiful coastline, but then also to be able to see how precious this landscape is to the traditional owners of that land, and how important it is that we honour that and continue to give back the land that was once taken so brutally, I guess, over 230 years ago. So it's important that that continues.
I know this is a little bit outside of your scope, but what do you think about underwater places? Because one of the things this project has sort of really brought to light is that, it's not just sea, it's a place that once people lived in, and now it's, been colonised by a marine environment, but it's, what do you think about the value of underwater places, or how are we looking at underwater places now that we know that there's this sort of deep history of the peopling of Australia?
Yeah, I mean, remarkably, archaeologists are now working under the sea. In northwestern Australia, there's clear evidence of archaeological sites several metres under the current sea level, and that's being worked on. And so there's the ability to look at that is certainly present. So I'm sure the Bass Strait Islands, potentially has that opportunity in the future. The other quite interesting aspect that we haven't been able to find much out about so far, but in the centre of the Bassian Plain, of course, is this what we think of as a large shallow lake that likely existed while people were crossing the Bassian land bridge. So it wasn't just purely dry, open landscape. In the middle of the Bassian Plain was what we think is quite a large swampy lake system. And we know very, very little about that, beyond the fact that the topography of the Bassian Plain suggests there's a large shallow depression in the middle that would have held probably ephemeral lake or swamp environment. So there's a whole area of research and exciting work to be done in that space to reconstruct what that Bassian Plain lake might have looked like. And no doubt people were walking around using that landscape. Waterbirds, etc., would have come there much like they do today in Lake Eyre or those other inland lakes of Australia that it's such an attraction to waterbirds and migratory birds. Undoubtedly, Bass Strait had a similar kind of scenario where the large lake in the middle of that Bassian Plain would have been a centre for waterbirds and so on to come. And of course, even today, there's the bird life and the mutton bird utilisation in Bass Strait is really important for local community, and community every year going to some of the islands to harvest the mutton bird as part of their traditional harvesting practices. So yeah, there's this current in connection with the bird life of Tasmania through traditional communities, but no doubt, again, that has a very deep history, and the reconstruction of what the Bassian Plain lake, this large lake system, was like in the past is something that, again, would be really fascinating to look more closely at. It'd be underwater coring from a boat kind of environment, but it's certainly possible. But that is yet to be really looked into. So lots of exciting prospects for the future if that's what Tasmanian Aboriginal community would like to see happen. Next, we've been so lucky to have here at the university a lot of interest from students to be involved in this kind of research. So we have PhD students as well as masters and honours students who have been able to come down and do some of the research. What I'm really keen on doing is engaging with some of the Tasmanian Aboriginal rangers and hopefully getting those rangers more involved in the laboratory work and get a better understanding of how we actually process some of the samples and how that can be, how the kind of interpretation of that scientific data can be brought to the fore. So I think that's a really important work that we can do. And I think there's a notion that just taking these sediments and then the process is finished is that's not the case. There's the issue of actually these sediments hold so much important information for the communities that these sediments should be treated appropriately, and the idea of taking the sediments back, or at least the information from those sediments, and making sure that information is and the material is returned in appropriate ways, I think is also important, that we take the science we do, but also in many ways repatriate, I guess, the data and the material that we've been able to work on from those environments and take it back and make sure that people are aware of the information, as well as repatriating any data or material that needs to be repatriated. So that's part of the whole process of the work we're doing.
That's very beautiful and very to even bring those samples back home, back to their place.
Yeah, that's right. And I think recent conversations with some traditional owners in this part of Canberra, we've been talking about what these cores actually mean, I guess, to people, and it's, for a scientist, it obviously has deep scientific interest and amazing amount of data and so on can be gathered. But one of the stories that can come from this is the notion that it's actually the voices or the stories of the past are actually being taken out and brought up with these cores, so that it's the voices of the ancestors that are actually speaking through the cores and telling the stories as well. So that's a really lovely way of thinking about how we interpret and how we treat the cores in many ways. It's not just pure scientific material. It's actually the voices and stories of people from the past that are actually coming to the fore and coming to the surface, as it were. So and that changes the way you think about and treat and work with the material that you're looking at.
Yes, it must.
Yeah, no, it does. So so it's been learning a lot, I guess. Working with traditional owners and people about how to treat the kind of material that we're gathering, and so that's an important part of the work we're doing as well.
That was one of my questions far back, is working with different types of knowledge, but I think we've already covered it enough. But that's so beautiful. The voices of the old people, and their traces, I suppose, the smoke and the charcoal and
that's right.
pollen and
the and that was actually part of I'll show you as we go out, but there's a beautiful artwork that was produced by Jenny Camare Martinello, who introduced this idea to me about the voices coming out of the cores that we take. And yeah, she's represented that in some beautiful artwork, in fact, that I'll be able to show you. But it's glass work that replicates coring, but also has embedded in it indicators of voices coming out of the ground. So it's quite moving. And so, yeah, again, these interactions with Indigenous First Nations people on the work we do has opened up whole new ways of thinking about the past, but also the actual science that we do and how we treat that information and how we must involve and return this sort of information to traditional owners.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. I think we can wrap it up there. We've talked long and broadly about the land bridge and the
hopefully you've got covered most of that, but anyway.
Well, we know where you are.
Yeah,
we want
that's
to ask
right.
follow-up questions. So thank you.
That's all right. No worries.
That's great. And that's where we'll leave it from Simon Haberle. The next episode features a fascinating interview with Palaeoecologist woman and Pakana Ranger Fiona Ma, who talks about her people's deep spiritual connection to Tyaricha, the Bass Strait Islands. This program is part of the Landbridge Digital Story Project. A range of companion media, a documentary film and other stories are freely available to read, listen to, watch and share on the website thelandbridge.au. The Landbridge Digital Story was produced by Wind and Sky Productions. Creative producers were me, Lucinda Horrocks, and Jarry Nemo. The credits for this episode are detailed in the podcast program notes. The project was funded by the Australian Government through the Our Marine Parks Grants Program. Until next time, thanks for listening.